Hello my friends, and welcome to this next video in the series. Here we shall be talking about classes in JavaScript. In about 2 videos ago, I talked about classes and objects, and I said that a class is just like a template from which objects are created. And it is usually the norm in many programming languages that before you create objects, you have to define or create a class. And from that class, you now create objects. But in JavaScript, it is not absolutely necessary that you create a class before you make objects from that class. You can just directly create objects. And so we saw how to do that using the object literal. We saw that we can create an object literal such as const object1 is equals an object like this. And instead of this object, we can now start to have functions and properties that belongs to this object1 right here. We also saw what this keyword means instead of an object literal. But then we went ahead to use something called an object constructor function to make creation of objects a bit more efficient. So we had a code like this. So right here is an object constructor function. We created a human object constructor function. And for this function, we passed these parameters, and then we were able to use this keyword to set properties for this human constructor. And then right here, we're able to use the new keyword to create a new object from this constructor. And then we assigned it to a person variable, and then we're able to access all of the properties or functions that are inside of this human object. Okay, so right here on line 14, I said something like person.height. And if we're going to save this file, we see that 1 gets printed on the console, and that's because we passed 1 right here as an argument for this myHeight parameter. So for this human, we have the height, names, and eyes properties, and then we have this bio function. And we were able to use the parameters given to this function during the declaration time to actually give a value to those properties. And inside of the function, we're able to use this keyword to refer to those properties that we have on this constructor. And that was what we did in the last video. But then if you hover around this human constructor function right here, you can say that VS Code is giving us a hint that says this constructor function may be converted to a class declaration. So what it is basically saying is that we can convert this object constructor right here, this human object constructor, to a class. But before I do that, I want to emphasize that we can create objects using the object literal. We can also use the object constructor function to create objects. And of course, we can use classes, which is what we have in most other programming languages officially, to create objects. Which one you choose to use is, however, up to you. But I want to say that in JavaScript in particular, most programmers would prefer to go with the object literal. But it's good that I show us how to work with classes in case you encounter classes in JavaScript. Maybe you're digging into a code and you see that that code uses classes to work. So you can look at the class and understand how it works. You basically know how to do it because you've learned about classes in JavaScript. But basically, object literal would work fine, and you can even use object constructor function. And in fact, it is also good that I tell you that in JavaScript, function is just like a first class citizen. You can use functions to do anything. You see right here in this code, we're able to use a function to create a constructor, right? Because this is a function right here, we use it to create an object constructor, and that is why it is called an object constructor function. And we're able to create objects right here using this object constructor. So you can use function to create many things that you want to create in JavaScript. You can use function to do just about anything instead of having classes here and there. And the reverse is the case when it comes to programming language such as Java that uses classes for just about anything. So if you want to print something to the console, you must put it inside of a class, and so on and so forth. JavaScript is just flexible and easy to use. So let's call down the theory and actually convert this object constructor function right here into a class. So I'm going to hover around here, and then I'm going to click on quick fix, and then I'm going to click on enter to actually convert this object constructor function into a class. So right here, you see that we now have a class. That human constructor we had initially has been converted to a class. And if I should click on save, that is Command S on my Mac, you see we're still getting 1 printed to the console, which means that this code works just as fine. But in order not to confuse us, or in order to make things a bit clearer, I'm going to actually take all of this code away and show us from scratch how to create a class. So to create a class in JavaScript, you're just going to use the class keyword. I'm going to say class, and then you give the name of the class. And the name of the class should start with a capital letter like this, and which is also true if you want to create an object constructor function. And after this human, then I'm going to have my curly braces like this. Within this class, now I'm going to define a constructor. So I'm going to say constructor like this, and open parentheses, and then curly braces like so. This constructor is just like a function, and we can pass parameters to this constructor. So I can say something like names, age. These names and age are parameters, and I can come inside of the constructor and I'll say something like this dot human name is equals names, and then come on the next line and say something like this dot human age is equals age. So what I'm doing here is giving this human class properties, 2 properties for that matter, human name and human age, and the value is going to be names and age right here. And what that means is that when we use this human class to create an object, we'll pass it 2 things, or 2 arguments if you like. So I'm going to come down on this line and say something like human, open my parentheses, and then I can say Dominic, and then give a comma, and then I can say 23. And then in front of this human, I can have the new keyword like this. So right here, I've created an object using this human class right here. And what I can do is to store this object inside of a variable. So I can say something like const human1 is equals new human Dominic 23. And that's it. And you can see that this is very similar to how we use the object constructor function. And that means on this next line, I can say something like console.log human1.names. And when I save this file, we'll see that Dominic will get printed on the console. So I'm going to save this file, and right here we get an undefined, and it is undefined because this class right here does not have any names property. Rather, it has human name and human age. So if we come right here and change it to human age, or rather human name, and save, now you can see we have Dominic. And of course, we can also access the age by saying human age instead, and we have 23. So now we've seen that we can have a constructor right here inside of a class, and we can pass parameters to that constructor. And right inside of this constructor, we can create properties such as human name and human age, and then we can assign a value right here using the parameters that we passed. And that means that when we're creating the object using that class, the human class, we can pass arguments for the names and the age, which is what we did right here. And we can store the object we've created right here inside of a variable, human1, for example. And then we can now say human1 dot and use the dot property to access any property or function that this human class has. So my friends, we've seen how to do 2 things inside of this video. One is to create a constructor for our class, and we can pass parameters, names and age, or any other parameter you want to pass to the constructor. And we can create properties inside of this constructor and assign parameters as the value of those properties, which is what we did on line 3 and line 4. The second thing we saw now is that we can now create objects using that particular class. And when we create the object, we can store it inside of a variable and now use the variable to access any properties or functions that exist inside of the human class. So that's it, my friends, for this video. We've seen how to do 2 things in this video. The first thing is that we can create a class and have a constructor inside of the class. The constructor can take parameters, for example, names and age, and we use that name and age to give value to the properties we have for this class. And the properties we have for this particular class are human name and human age. And the second thing we saw is that we can now create an object using the new keyword and the human right here. And when using the human right here, we have to pass arguments for those parameters that we've given to the constructor. So that object can be stored inside of a variable. And then we can use that variable to access all the properties and even functions that exist for this class. In the next video, let's take a look at some of the other things we can do with classes. So talking about object-oriented programming with classes, such as encapsulation and inheritance, and some of the other things we can do with classes. See you in the next video. Please, my friends, like my videos and subscribe to my channel. It will go a long way in helping me to create videos like this.